It's key for American voters to understand the Kabuki dance in American politics. The term comes from a form of Japanese theater where there's a big pageanted drama that leads to a predictable outcome. It involves dancing in big costumes. In American politics, a kabuki dance is a political fake job where our sleazy politicians with great drama tell us that they're all about getting done what we, the voters, want done. But whenever that is something that their elite backers do not want, then there will always be some excuse for why, shucks, we were not able to get this done for you this time around. But here's the punchline. That's why you need to vote for more of us so we can finally get this done for you. No one could do the kabuki dance better than Ronald Reagan. And he did it mainly on abortion. A lot of people don't know this, but Ronald Reagan was the one who legalized the execution of babies ahead of Roe versus Wade. And then he led the Republican Party in the kabuki dance with the strategy that as long as you can stack the court with justices who will uphold Roe v. Wade, then you can tell your constituents that you're all about life, what a wonderful choice. But you'll never offend your elite backers who want to keep abortion legal to weed down the population of people they feel are undesirable. So that's why Trump got into so much trouble during his first term in office, Trump 45, because he did not understand the kabuki dance. He came from outside politics. And that's why he was denounced by both sides, his own side and the Democrat side, because their elitist backers were telling them, denounce this guy's terrible. So now with Trump 47, surprise, he's learned to do the kabuki dance pretty quickly because he ultimately had to capitulate to elitists in order to avoid prison ahead of the 2024 election. So now Trump is a servant of elitists. What is an elitist anyway? People throw around the term, but you need a useful definition. Is it rich people, people with privileges? Technically, what an elitist is an elitist is someone who believes the government should rig the system so that others have to serve them. So let me give you an example of elitism at work today. Liz Uline, who's the co-founder of Uline Corporation, she's a conservative herself, but she reflects the views of elitists on both sides. And she's complaining in her 2025 materials handling catalog. She writes a letter in these catalogs. She's complaining that young people are no longer feeling that their whole dignity and moral worth depends on the compliments received from an employer. They're just leaving. If they don't like the way their work conditions are going, they leave. And that didn't used to be the case. And so she's opining in this letter, why are we having to deal with this? Now, she never turns to introspection, like what's wrong with us? Why aren't we accommodating our employees and things like that? No, it's, what's wrong with the system? What can government do to rig the system to get things back the way They were. And the number one thing she lists is Obamacare. Obamacare has made it so that the average person can have health care insurance apart from an employer. Didn't used to be that way. So elitists want the government to rig the system so that the average American cannot obtain health care insurance outside of an employer. They want the system to be rigged so that you have to serve them in order to get health care insurance. So that's what the shutdown was all about. The shutdown was about the Democrats had to do the Kabuki dance. The Democrats had to pretend that, oh, we're all about keeping your health care benefits intact. But that's why there needed to be this big drama, the longest shutdown in American history. That's why we had to finally say, shucks, we couldn't get this done for you, but that's why you need to elect more of us. Because why? Because elitists, they want to rig the system so that you have to serve them. And they're fed up with Obamacare making people think that they don't have to work for an employer in order to have health care insurance. Now, another example is actually immigration. Trump 45 wanted to tighten our borders, but Trump 47 is now a servant of elitists. And elitists want a steady supply of, excuse me for saying this, peonic workers who will answer their bidding call without any concern for bargaining power. And illegal immigrants fit the bill. But the average person, the rest of us, not elitists, are fed up with this complete havoc that's being wreaked in the workplace by having so many people coming from countries illegally to take away American jobs. Now, the spiel is, the conservatives like George W. Bush will tell you, well, they're just taking jobs that no American would want to do. But it's actually jobs that no American would want to do for those wages and under those working conditions. See, there's a difference. But elitists don't want to deal with that. They just want people to work, to jump to it, to fold their hats in their hands and say, please, sir, I just want to work. And so what Trump has been doing is he's been doing the Kabuki dance on immigration with great drama, drama like they're eating the dogs, or they're raiding the churches. This is unprecedented. ICE is raiding churches. Even the churches are being raided. They're sending the Marines into Los Angeles. But when the dust settles, for every 3 deportations conducted by Obama and Biden without much ado, Trump has only conducted 2. In other words, as an illegal immigrant, you're actually a third safer under Trump than you were under Biden and Obama. But it doesn't seem like that because Trump plays up the Kabuki dance drama. He sends his Homeland Secretary, Kristi Noem, to the border with Mexico for a big announcement. The United States has plans, we're not even doing it, just plans to build an additional whopping 7 miles of border wall. Can you imagine that? 7 whole miles. Oh, that's worth a video. A few months later, he sends her back again, this time to get her picture taken painting the wall black. I see a fake wall and I want it painted black. In other words, this is ridiculous. There's no wall being built. With Trump 45, what got him into so much trouble the first few days of his presidency, he had no presidential honeymoon, as it's called, where the press gives him a break for a year. No, both sides were attacking him. And the reason is two words. He said two words that sent elitists on both sides into a complete panic. Maximize employment. See, the problem with that is that, let's talk about this. So, long before the United States, rich people figured out why we cannot all be so wealthy that you don't have to work again. You know, that's the measure of extreme wealth. You're so wealthy you never have to work again in your life. Why can't we all be that wealthy? Well, because if no one has to work, who's going to do your work for you? How poor is that? See, so elitists have always realized that their true material wealth is not in money. Money is just a notional amount. Instead, their true material wealth is their leverage over others. And what elitists have found is that by maintaining a pool of unemployed, then workers have to fold their hats in their hands and say, please, sir, I just want to work. And they get their way. They don't want so much unemployment that people start clamoring for change. Change. That's what the rich fear the most. And they don't want to have all the ills, the social ills associated with extreme unemployment. But they do want to maintain that pool. And they are willing to cut their noses off to spite the economy's face in order to maintain that pool of unemployed. So the rich would actually rather lose money in the stock market, than to allow any slippage in the relative component of wealth that takes the form of leverage over others. That's why Wall Street has always booed low unemployment, because Wall Street knows that the rich will react by having the Federal Reserve put the brakes on the growth economy to drive up unemployment, and that's bad for stocks. But the really rich people would rather lose money than lose leverage, because money is just a notional amount. It's their leverage over others. That's their true material wealth. The only exception was Trump 45. Trump 45, and Wall Street remembers this, people cheered low unemployment because they knew that under Trump, the Federal Reserve would not be allowed to put the brakes on the growth economy. Now with Trump 47, now that he's capitulated to elitists, we see a different trend. See, it's like with the Federal Reserve, they have those statements that they make, like little tiny changes, and people follow them very closely. It's no longer maximize employment. Now it's maximum employment. What's the difference? Maximum employment is like one of those all-you-can-eat restaurants where they tap you on the shoulder and say, and that's all you can eat. We've reached maximum employment. Any more employment, and we'll have to put the brakes on the growth economy again to keep workers from obtaining strong demand, so that they have to fold their hats in their hands and say, please, we just want to work. And that's what sanctuary states are all about. When workers start making progress in achieving bargaining power, elitists make it into a sanctuary state so that then the state will be flooded by people who are willing to work for whatever the elitists want them to work for. No questions asked. So you have to take that into consideration. On the one hand, you want to be compassionate to people, but you don't want to let the pretense of compassion to some be used to oppress others. Everybody should be invited to the same increase in their lives. So with Trump 47, the thing where you see all of these, these big name CEOs going to the White House and having a big ass kissing ceremony where they kiss President Trump's ass, is like, oh, we're very, very pleased and thank you very much, Mr. President. It's not that way at all. It's the other way around. He's kissing their asses. But it looks better for the sheepish, naive voters if he makes it sound like they're kissing his ass. Let's give some examples, like with Taiwan. Do you think Taiwan's just giving the United States hundreds of billions of dollars? No, they expect you, the common worker, to work for them. Instead of saying made in Taiwan, now it's going to say made in USA. You're going to be the new Taiwanese worker, and you're not going to be able to get health care benefits unless you work for them, because the system is being rigged so that you have to serve elitists. That's what elitism is all about, having the government rig the system so that others have to serve them. Do you think Japan bought U.S. steel as a special favor to the United States? No, you're going to be working for them. And you can be fooled by things like, oh, they gave Trump a golden share. That's hilarious, guys. So, and then, he threw the unborn under the bus for the 2024 election, because the same conservative elitists who backed Ronald Reagan and co., they actually were the ones who were keeping Roe versus Wade intact. In fact, when Planned Parenthood versus Casey was handed down in 1992, 20 years after Roe versus Wade, 8 of the 9 justices were appointed by Republican presidents after Roe versus Wade, including the elevation of the Chief Justice, and the remaining 1 was appointed by a Catholic president, which mirrors the political composition legalizing the execution of babies ahead of Roe versus Wade. Most likely you were a Republican leader like Ronald Reagan, the governor of California, or Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York. If not, you were most likely a Catholic leader like John Burns, the governor of Hawaii. The only exception was at the New York and state legislature level, you were most likely a Jewish member of the legislature, because those 2 states were swamped with young Jewish women who were exploring the melting pot, so to speak, and conservative Jews were very upset about the pregnancies they were having with non-Jewish men, especially African American men. They were spearheading the legalization of executing babies way ahead of the game. But then it was taken up by conservatives. But then once the Supreme Court in Roe versus Wade agreed to do the dirty work, then that's when Ronald Reagan had his epiphany. If he just could get the party to switch over from shouldering the burden of legalizing the execution of babies. Instead, they play the other face. They say, "Oh, we're the pro-life good people. Vote for us." But then with the other face, they stack the court with with 8 justices who will uphold the execution of babies. That's why Roe versus Wade eventually got overturned thanks to Trump, because Trump didn't understand the Kabuki dance, which is why politicians were so mad at him, and he overturned the infamous decision. So I think because of that, I always have to respect Trump. He may have other faults, but they're minuscule to having overturned Roe versus Wade. That was a really great achievement and something that he should be proud of. But ironically, in order to keep himself out of prison, he threw the unborn under the bus for the 2024 election, and then his bitter wife Melania, she turned the bus around and drove back over them with that hateful video of hers about how she's too entitled to have to put up with the unborn getting any rights at all. That's really sad. So you guys, whether you're Democrats or you're Republicans or whatever you are, you got to watch out for political fake jobs, especially the Democrats. In my opinion, I vote Republican. I voted for Trump all 3 times, but Democrats, you're so gullible and naive, like this Jimmy Kimmel guy, that when elitists, or you could say tyranny or elitists, see how gullible you are, they start rubbing their greedy little hands together, saying, if we can just get those gullible liberals to elect one of our puppets, then their fate will be sealed, because no matter how tyrannical we are, no matter how obvious it is, they'll cover for us for fear of giving momentum to the other side. Because, the Democrats end up with this worry that, if they say anything wrong about their own, then the other side will get elected, and they'll have to live with that, when the truth is both sides are puppets for elitists. Ironically, the one exception was Trump 45, and what happened? Liberals completely denounced the guy. Oh, it was amazing. But let me give you an example. For example, in Hawaii, I'm a resident of Hawaii. Out of state most of the time, but still a resident of Hawaii. Lately, at least. The liberal press, Hawaii's a blue state, very Democrat. The liberal press asked the governor of Hawaii, but we don't understand, Mr. Governor. What does installing facial recognition cameras at the Honolulu airport have to do with fighting COVID? And without missing a beat, the governor says, look, we're trying to get to the new normal. And that shut the press up, because the press knew that something was wrong, but because they're liberals, they wouldn't say anything, because they don't want to give momentum to the other side. So liberals are especially vulnerable. And that's what you're seeing with this Mamdani thing. Whatever song gets you elected is basically the song the guy was singing, right? It's like, oh, Trump's terrible, boo Trump, he's a fascist and stuff like that. And that's just to get your vote. If that gets your vote, that's the song that tingles your barrel. That's fine. You're going to vote for him, and then elitists say, okay, now here's what we want you to do. And elitists told Mamdani right away that our main puppet is Trump, and so you're going to be buddies with Trump now. Okay, see, because he's already been voted for. So, tough for you. That's the way it works in American politics. Now, there's a few exceptions, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. My big joke about Trump 47 is he surrounded himself with boobs, and apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene wasn't one of them. So she's resigning now because she's a smart lady. But you guys really need to think about your political choices, and don't be suckers. And if you really want to help people, then help them.